The shocking transformation from U.S. Marine to Somali Warlord. In the 90s, Somalia witnessed some of the hardest times in its history. Torn apart and ravaged by warlords fighting for dominance, the country and its people were left at the mercy of insurgent factions scrambling for power. But one man stood out, arguably one of the most influential figures in Somalia's history. Hussein Farrah Aidid played a major role in making Somalia the country it is today. From a humble U.S. soldier, Hussein rose to become one of the most formidable warlords in Somalia's history. Today, we're going to talk about Hussein's shocking transformation from a U.S. Marine to a Somali warlord. In 1991, Mohamed Farrah Aidid emerged as one of the most powerful warlords in Somalia, playing a key role in overthrowing the authoritarian regime of Mohamed Siad Barre. This created a power vacuum that plunged Somalia into civil war, with multiple factions led by former military commanders vying for control. Aidid headed the United Somali Congress USC faction, which managed to gain significant territory in southern Somalia. A calculating and ruthless strategist, he cultivated an image as a champion of the Hawiye clan and used this to build a formidable coalition of militia fighters fanatically loyal to him. He took multiple wives to expand his clan connections, the first of whom bore him 5 children. The eldest of his children was Hussein Farrah Aidid, born in 1962 in the rural desert town of Galkayo. As a teenager in the late 1970s, Hussein witnessed his homeland descend into chaos and repression under Barre, whose regime tortured and killed descendants from rival clans. Before we continue, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell to get notified anytime we post amazing videos like this. Alright, back to the video. As chaos and violence escalated in Somalia under Barre's rule, Hussein's mother decided to flee with her children to escape the brutality. In 1979, at age 17, Hussein immigrated with his family to the United States, settling in Covina, California. 2 years later, he completed high school and went on to enlist in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves in April 1987, at the height of the Cold War. Hussein completed basic training and then went straight into the reserves as an artilleryman with the 1st Battalion, 14th Marines, based out of Pico Rivera, California. During his time in the reserves, he pursued higher education, taking classes at Citrus College and getting into the civil engineering program at Long Beach State University. Hussein juggled his Marine Corps reserve duties with his college classes throughout the late 1980s. However, he did not end up finishing his civil engineering degree, as world events would soon intervene to alter the course of his life dramatically. Back in Somalia, dictator Siad Barre had grown deeply unpopular due to repression, corruption, and economic mismanagement. In the late 1980s, armed resistance groups began to challenge his rule, including a faction led by Hussein's father, Mohamed Farrah Aidid. In 1991, these groups finally succeeded in overthrowing Barre's regime after a prolonged civil war, including the vital capture of the capital, Mogadishu. However, with Barre gone, Somalia descended into violent anarchy as armed factions led by powerful warlords battled for control of the power vacuum. After initially emerging victorious, Hussein's father, Aidid, declared himself president in Mogadishu, but other warlords refused to recognize his authority, plunging the country into an all-out civil war. As the civil war raged and order completely collapsed, Somalia began to suffer a devastating famine in 1992. The United Nations tried to help out. However, things got messy with rival groups in the mix, obstructing the essential flow of food to those in need, leading to the deaths of over 300,000 Somalis. Amid all this chaos, Mohamed Aidid's faction emerged as a disruptive force, launching assaults upon the very UN peacekeeping forces striving to bring stability to the country. Around the middle of 1993, Aidid had become a huge thorn in the side of the U.S. and the United Nations. Not only were his fighters stealing food, medical aid, and supplies, but they also carried out a deadly ambush on 24 Pakistani peacekeepers. This caused the United Nations to put a $25,000 bounty on his head. The UN peacekeeping mission took a more intense turn, so President George W. Bush gave the green light for Operation Restore Hope to gain control of the militias and ensure the proper distribution of food to the Somali people as intended. Among the U.S. forces deployed to Somalia was Hussein, who was called up from the Marine Corps Reserves due to his familiarity with the country and its language. He served as an interpreter and liaison for U.S. forces as they confronted militias that were seizing relief supplies. This included tense negotiations with Aidid's forces, putting Hussein directly across the table from his own father. However, due to rising casualties and a lack of clear objectives, the U.S. and UN eventually pulled out of Somalia in early 1995 after the infamous Black Hawk Down battle that saw 18 American troops killed. The country was left once again to dissolve into clan warfare and starvation, while Aidid declared himself president of an unrecognized separate state. After returning from Somalia, Hussein left active duty service in 1995. Though he remained in the Marine Corps Reserves, he became a naturalized U.S. citizen and found work as an engineering clerk in West Covina, California, a regular civilian job that paid just $9 per hour. However, that humble life would soon be transformed in unexpected ways. In 1996, back in Mogadishu, Hussein's father, Mohamed Farrah Aidid, was badly wounded in combat with a rival warlord. He clung to his life for weeks, but eventually succumbed to his injuries. This left a huge power vacuum in southern Somalia, where Aidid's ravaged clan dominated. The clan elders now moved swiftly to appoint a successor who could keep their militia loyal and fend off rivals. Initially, several warlords under Aidid's group rose to claim his position. However, no one wanted to come to an agreement on who would become the next leader. After running out of options, the clan leaders decided to give the title to Mohamed Aidid's son, Hussein. Despite Hussein's youth and Western upbringing, the choice fell on him due to his lineage. The various family groups within the clan saw Hussein as an acceptable compromise leader. So the elders called Hussein back from California to take up his father's mantle. Hussein was surprised but felt obligated to honor his father's legacy and the will of his clan elders. So at just 33 years old, he left his humble life in California behind and returned to Somalia in late 1996 to take over leadership of his father's factious militia. Despite having no real military experience besides his stint in the Marine Corps Reserves, Hussein quickly consolidated control and earned the loyalty of thousands of fighters. To unite the families within his ravaged sub-clan, Hussein announced he would hold an assembly to democratically select their first post-war leader. This helped establish his authority. However, Hussein soon backtracked on his democratic pledges. Instead, he continued his father's autocratic policies and efforts to dominate southwest Somalia militarily. Hussein's fighters launched attacks to expand their territory, clashing bloodily with rival warlords and local resistance groups. Rival warlord Ali Mahdi Mohammed, who was intentionally recognized as the president of Somalia, refused to recognize Hussein's growing power. This set the stage for a violent confrontation between the two sides over control of the capital Mogadishu and other parts of southern Somalia. Hussein's troops were accused of grave human rights abuses as they imposed control by force. Over 7,000 civilians died in the clashes just in Mogadishu alone. Initially defiant, Hussein soon realized he could not defeat Ali Mahdi militarily. So by 1998, nearly 2 years into the conflict, Hussein backed down and entered surprisingly moderate peace talks with his main rival. The negotiations led to a power-sharing deal, with Mogadishu divided between Mahdi and Hussein allied clan warlords. Hussein's shift toward diplomacy marked a major turning point away from his father's rigid, uncompromising style. In fact, many believed he had the potential to evolve into a more consensus-oriented leader. In 2000, Hussein formally joined the new transitional national government, the first attempt to restore central authority after years of anarchy. Hussein tried to adapt to civilian leadership roles within the unstable transitional national government throughout the early 2000s. At various points, he served as the government's interior minister, finance minister, and minister of post and telecommunications. However, Hussein struggled with the intricacies of governance after years as a militia leader. He lacked political skills and a passion for administration. Rival factions continued jockeying intensely for power and spoils behind the scenes. In 2004, Hussein's militia clashed with Ethiopian forces near the border, soaring relations with Somalia's neighbor. Soon after, he was fired from his ministerial roles over allegations of corruption and close ties to warlords undermining the government. These allegations illustrated Hussein's uncertain position, not fully a civilian statesman, but unable to let go of his military power base either. By 2007, the transitional government had become largely dysfunctional and irrelevant. Hussein decamped to Eritrea, along with other opposition figures and warlords, obtaining support to overthrow the interim government he had once been part of. This ushered in yet another volatile period in Somalia's history. Hussein spent several years in exile in Eritrea, plotting his next move. He made various attempts to build alliances with warlords and faction leaders to mount a challenge for control of Somalia. However, the rise of hardline Islamic militant groups like al-Shabaab made the landscape far more complex and volatile. In 2009, Hussein resurfaced in Nairobi, Kenya, alongside a new American advisor, a controversial Washington, D.C. lobbyist and consultant named R. Michael Stock. Their unfamiliar partnership aimed to rebrand Hussein and make another run at the Somali presidency during the next election in 2012. Stock helped Hussein cover up his past as a warlord and reposition himself as an elder statesman committed to reconciliation. The slick PR push included speeches where Hussein expressed his desire to strengthen ties with the U.S. and build a memorial to the 1993 Black Hawk Down battle that killed American soldiers. However, despite the heavy lobbying, Hussein's bid failed to gain much traction within Somalia itself. The country remained fractured along clan lines, with much distrust toward former warlords like himself. Hussein withdrew from the 2012 election, and his political ambitions subsequently faded. He retreated from the public life in Somalia. In the years after his failed bid for presidency, Hussein largely stepped back from politics and militia leadership, spending much of his time living quietly in Nairobi. Somalia remained plagued by instability, droughts, terrorist attacks, and one of the highest child mortality rates in the world. Now in his 60s, Hussein seemed weary of conflict and power struggles. Occasionally, he would give interviews reflecting on his controversial career trajectory, from a young refugee and U.S. Marine veteran to one of Somalia's most notorious warlords and presidential candidates. When asked if he had any regrets, he condemned the blind ambition that led many warlords, including himself, to prolong Somalia's misery. He said he wished he had switched from a militia leader to a civilian politician much earlier in his life. While largely disappearing from public view, Hussein did emerge to support humanitarian initiatives in Somalia. He worked with groups drilling boreholes to bring clean water to rural communities struggling through drought and famine. It was unclear if he would ever seek power again. In the end, Hussein Farrah Aidid's winding path from soldier to warlord to politician and back again illustrates the complexities of power and conflict in his shattered homeland to this day. So what do you think about Hussein Aidid's journey from a U.S. soldier to a warlord? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments.